to say.
13.
A couple of
Just
years.
a couple.
A couple of years in Chicago. She's a huge White Sox fan. I'm joking. She's a Cubs fan, but I wanted to get that reaction a little bit. But understanding what Erin and her team does with alternative dispute resolution, I was like, wait, let me get this straight. You're like an arbitrator / mediator, but you aren't necessarily always on the school district side. When you're not on the family side, you're that last level of, in layman's terms here, of that last level of before we get to the lawyers, which, God, they don't seem to help anybody except for themselves. Not to be your anti-lawyer, but I guess. But anyway, so as I go off script here, but this idea of how can we have this mediator / arbitrator within the confines of really trying to accomplish the goal, which is obviously to accomplish the goal, which is the kid, and making sure that kid's moving forward, which is the goal of all of us, and that's why we're all in this room. And going backwards again, my name is Tim McHugh. I'm with Saddleback Education. We have been in business for 40 years. My wife and I are second generation, bought the company from our family, 16, 17 years ago. And what we do is not rocket science. All we do is write high-low books. Anybody doesn't know what high-low book is? It's high interest, low readability. So our whole goal is don't give a 7th grader a book that looks like this. Give them a book that might look like this with a cool cover, interesting topics, and something where they feel respected. And then they get in the inside and they find short sentences and the vocabulary. So that's the whole world that we deal with. You can come visit us and say hi to me in the exhibit hall later if you'd like. And that is me. But I also live in Orange County, California, about 70 miles away from Erin and her team. And I already kind of gave you a little heads up, but Erin's been in here since 2016, so 6 years out of her Chicago world, likes the weather a lot better, does a little jiu-jitsu, and has a really cool job, I think. So I'll let you take it from there.
Thank you. So a couple other things to add to the lovely introduction. When I took this position in October of last year, I was a Department of One for 10 months. So a lot of the work that I'm going to talk about is my own intellectual property, but also seeking out those thought partners. My director, Ed Baisley, who's running around, he was integral on that because most people were still at home and hybrid, and I would go into the office every day because he was there. And so it was, Ed, you got a minute? Ed, you got a minute? And he'd come and check on me throughout the day, and we'd just sit and talk and collaborate, and ideas would bud, and I have a whole notebook from that time in this role. But now I have a team. Tirsa's over here. She's one of my instructional coordinators, and I'll explain the rest of my team as well. So I hope today you walk out with an understanding of using systems thinking to create a culture of collaboration, the importance of preventative practices, and using data to inform our decisions at a district level. So equity is really important when you're creating a new system. Now, our ADR and our learning recovery system has to function within the greater San Diego system. And so that was, had some obstacles to it, and using equity to drive this perception and choice and structure was very helpful so that everyone could have access. It is a part of our daily thinking and actions within our existing systems. And so if we continue what we've always been doing in California specifically and across our country, our students with disabilities and our non-disabled students will suffer. They will suffer in their perception of what's acceptable. They will also suffer in what they think they can achieve. So when I came into this position, I was charged with creating 2 systems. One with an immediate need, and I'll go through that first, and then the other one with more of a long-term impact to change culture. So I wanted to, before I get into the meat, because there's many people not from California here, we have a thing called SELPAs. San Diego Unified is its own SELPA. It's an individual SELPA. We also have, like, for instance, in San Diego County, we have East County SELPA. And that is a group of special ed administrators that create programs and resources to support other smaller districts that might not have the funding or the resources to support alternative dispute or support programs for students with dyslexia or what have you. I know we do inter-SELPA transfers sometimes, so we have a vision, impaired vision program, whereas some of our neighboring counties or neighboring towns don't, and so they will pay us for the kid to be bused and get those supports through us. So that's kind of how the SELPA works in California. It was very new to me, coming from Chicago. The other aspect of California that is very different, because before I got here, I had never been in a meeting with a lawyer, an advocate. I didn't even know what the advocates were. I had never been a part of due process. And I got out here and there are advocates and lawyers in every meeting. It's just a different dynamic. And parents feel like they're not supported by the IEP, school site IEP team. And so they go and seek these outside people to come and help them navigate the system. And a lot of the work I want to do is to, not to get rid of them, but change how that interaction and that partnership is. So system one is learning recovery. And learning recovery came out of the pandemic because we had so many kiddos that were behind. There it goes. Were behind and needed support. So the California Department of Education said, okay, we see you, and here's money, figure it out. Every district and SELPA handles this in a different way. We're doing an in-house program, and we are focusing on extending learning supports, enhancing supports, and extending our school year. And all of this has to be done outside of the offer of FAPE. So this is not a part of what's written in the services of the IEPs, but it's in addition. And so that's a really key point because it affected how we created this structure. That we needed an equitable system, and our school district values autonomy at the site level. So what that looks like is our site leaders have a lot of autonomy on the programs they choose to use, assessments they choose to use, like the district has universal, but if they want to use their Title I funding, because they get a decent amount of it, depending on where they're at in the city, they can use that, or their state funding, which we call LCFF, they can use that to support special programs. We have charities and grants. There's so many things that principals can do that looks different at every community school. We have a system of small elementaries that feed into larger middles, that feed into larger high schools. We're broken into 6 areas, and within each of those areas, there's clusters, and the clusters change a little bit, but the idea is that each area has clusters in different parts of San Diego. San Diego is very spread out, not like Chicago, where I could go a block and that's the community, and you drive everywhere. And so having the clusters allows the area superintendents or the leaders of those, about 30 schools usually, to see the different atmospheres and things of that nature. They're working with low income, they're working with affluent, you know, it's just a mixture. So I do like that piece. And so we wanted principals to be able to create learning recovery for their school site, but also support them in individualizing it for all students. We have a short window of planning and implementation. I got hired in October of last year, October 5th, and the planning and implementation timeline was already started. And so I was playing catch up a lot. And then our funding for this program is done in September of 23. So it's quick and dirty. Learning recovery structure. So there's a few things. This is outside of the offer of faith, like I said, and what I work with teams on is determining, quantifying, and documenting. Because all service providers, because it's based on progress towards IEP goals, is how we're monitoring it. All service providers are having input on if there is learning loss, if there is not learning loss. If they miss services because of something that happened during COVID, whether it's staff shortages or it's like somebody got, in the beginning of the pandemic, so many people were being hospitalized, right? And that hospitalization took them, and we didn't have subs. So all of those factors are feeding into what we're calling learning recovery. So I make sure they have data and present levels to show growth or the lack of growth towards IEP goals. Team action, or our notes section of our IEPs, they have a boilerplate statement that they can put in, and that's just a way for a new school, whether it's elementary to middle to high school, or they moved, to monitor, say, oh, they had learning recovery, they know who to call to get access to the plan, because I archive. And then we have a prior written notice, because we do have a culture of lawyers and advocates. And so that's our legally stuff. And then I created a learning recovery action plan, which I will share with you as well. We wanted service providers to have access to all the resources, whether we work with them or not. So I have I call it a one-pager. It's a Google Doc of links. And there's screencasts and trainings and step-by-step PowerPoint of how to determine if there's learning recovery. I like to say we use the ESY model. How long did it take for kiddos to regain their skills after the pandemic? Are they still trying to regain those skills? And it has a determining guide, like quantifying guide, because I can't give a formula. So and then we have our leadership supports. Because they can modify it and make it work for their own school, they needed support too. So I have email language around getting volunteers, because I pay them, but they have to get the volunteers to implement the interventions. We have implementation logs, we have checklists for them. I have a survey template for them. Google is wonderful, forced copy, friends, forced copies. And then I also focused a lot of my time, I would Zoom from 8 a.m. till 8 at night sometimes, just back-to-back meetings, talking with teams and principals, and then going to stakeholder meetings. So each area has their clusters. Well, they do a cluster meeting, and it's a community meeting. They used to be in person, now they're via Zoom, and I would go and present about learning recovery and present about the system and how to request support, because a family can ask for support with learning recovery. The team can help determine it, because we want to foster that collaboration. There is an article from the La Jolla cluster meeting that they put out in their little local newspaper, just sharing, getting the word out even more. So it was really great that that is something that people have access to. I also spoke at our community advisory committee for special ed, and that's a district-wide stakeholder committee. I would go to the area superintendents had their own office hours with school leaders, and I would go to those meetings and present and answer questions and problem solve and schedule. And so here is what our action plan looks like. If you notice up here, it's kind of small, but there's a screencast, so if they forget how to fill it out, I got them covered. It's clickable. This is something that can be filled out in the IEP meeting towards the end of the meeting, if they determine there's learning loss, and it's very simple. The rest of the document is cut and paste the IEP goals that need to be worked on. When I train teams and they're like, social emotional is on there. Why? Because kids can have learning loss and social emotional skills. Well, how do we do that? Be creative. Think outside the box. I'm open to any of those things. If you think it doesn't apply, send me an email, we'll talk about it, it probably does apply. You know, I had some teams say, well, what if we got some gen ed kids and special ed kids? I said, as long as the special ed kids show up, because that's the funding, right? Because as much as I hate to say it, funding matters, and it does drive a lot of the programs we have. And so, a lot of our schools have gardens, and go work on your community garden. They gotta work together, they gotta follow directions, they gotta interact and talk with each other. It's a great tool, use it. Do a beautification project. When I worked at the separate school for students with emotional, behavioral, and mental illness in the district, I had a whole group during the day that would do beautification. Like, we painted the picnic tables, that is the lunch area outside, you know, in school colors, and I got a grant to upgrade the garden, and they helped me work on it. Like, just little things like that. That matters, and the kids take ownership of that. And our kids with emotional and trauma, they need that kind of work, because that's how they connect, and that's how they put value into all the other aspects of education. Here is my one pager. We do office hours. All of our resources are here. So these are archived trainings that I've done on Zoom that I recorded. We have our guides, and I'm gonna go into and show you. This is, I call this our IEP guide for learning and recovery. And this is the document that I tell ed specialists, if you use nothing else from my resource page, you use this. It is updated frequently, and it is the guide for all things related to learning recovery. If you notice, this was added a little while after we started implementing, because we had our due process, that people that didn't access my program and went straight to due process, because that's the culture in our district, to get support for learning loss. Then we have this like double weird limbo area. So I just said, email me, I'll check with due process to see if we can offer and if we can't offer. And they work really well with us. They were a great support. Most of the time it doesn't matter. They can do both. I have sentence stems for those present levels to help ed specialists really generate that thought process and ensure they have quantitative, qualitative, some type of data to support the need for learning recovery. Harmful effects. I talk about this in my training a lot. Harmful effects are still important. Even though it's an in addition to, and it's a resource, we really need to ensure that our kiddos, we're considering all aspects. So we might have a kid with dyslexia or ADHD. They're tired by the end of the day. They want to go home and have a snack and play and let their brain relax after focusing all day. An after school program that's going to be heavily reading, it's probably not the best option for them at that point in time. But we extended our school year, and we have a 4-week appointment-based program that is all volunteers. It is after our Summer of Joy, right? Summer of Joy? Summer of Love, I don't know. But we had summer school for all students in San Diego Unified this past year, and ESY was embedded in that program. They also had afternoons of enrichment where they went and learned surfing. They did all kinds of things, which is really cool. So my program ran after all of that finished for 4 weeks, and 6 sites volunteered to give us access to their campus. I had volunteers running the sites, and my team was wonderful because they started July 1st and they jumped in. And they started calling parents that we have action plans for that said summer, and setting up appointments, setting up the intervention times, working with transportation, because that was the only time we were able to get transportation. They didn't have additional personnel during the school year to add routes. So if you have any kids that needed transport due to their disability, they couldn't access learning recovery after school or before school unless the parents were able to pick up or drop off. and not all parents can. And so summer was our option. We served 65 students. We had 105 plans submitted. We got a hold of that many parents, and a lot of the supports were one-on-one. So that was really great. So we're gonna have another one of those this summer, and then our funding is done. So we're trying to really get out to schools and make sure we're impacting that aspect. Team action boiler statements, and this is not determining anything. This is just saying it's there. It is determined by the IEP team in the IEP meeting, and then that action plan is made. That's the part that is the collaboration for this. If they're not offering learning recovery for our team action or notes section, then we also had another factor that came after the fact, but was a huge impact to our program, is we had a backlog of initial assessments for our early learners. And we had an assessment team last summer, and they were getting those assessments out because the kiddos needed in-person assessments, so we couldn't assess during COVID and during pandemic times. And so they did this, and they let parents know, once you get to your school, when the school starts, let them know that there was a delay and you would like learning recovery. And then the IEP team comes in, creates a plan, and supports that student. This is our guide, so our quantifying learning loss for kiddos based on each IEP goal area. That's really important because all service providers can determine based on their goal, and if there are multiple service providers on a goal, which they very much often are, we work as a team to talk it through. So the other piece is I have told schools and teams, use this as a tool to collaborate and bridge any contention with families. A lot of our families are pretty well informed, and they know that this funding is there, and they will request it and access it, even if their kid is making progress. Because I'm sorry, in my years in education, this is the first time a state has given money specific to providing additional support for students with disabilities. It's huge. If I can quote Joe Biden, I believe he said, don't tell me what you value, show me your budget and I will tell you what you value. As much as I don't want to agree with that because the teacher brain in me is going, but it's student driven, Reality is, in order to have student driven decisions, we need funding. And if you're planning a budget, sorry, I worked in finance too, on the compliance side. If you're planning a budget, that's what's gonna fuel your programs and your interventions. And so this is the first time a state has really done that. And yeah, okay, fine, it's COVID, but it's still pretty big. And so I said, use it as a tool to work with your families. Refurbish that relationship that might have been lost during COVID, or never existed. And so you can offer minimal hours to support them. We have one family that we serviced during this summer, and mom was so happy, and my executive director was doing site visits this summer with me, and she goes, oh, so-and-so's here. No wonder I haven't gotten a phone call from mom. It must be going well. Like, this parent has our executive director's phone number and they talk regularly. That's how parents advocate in that way in our district. And so it was huge that they used this as a tool to work with mom and collaborate with her so she feels heard and seen and supported. But then we get into kids that are making a little bit of progress. I use the ESY idea. How long did it take students to regain their skills since the pandemic? Have they regained their skills? Okay, they regained the skills they lost during the pandemic, but are they where they should be? And if the answer is no, offer them learning recovery. If the answer is yes, and you want to push them a little further, offer learning recovery. let's use it while we have it. And then for a lot of our mod severe kiddos, they needed a lot of intervention, a lot of support in these areas for their IEP goals, and so that's an option. We emulated this with our assessments that were delayed and guiding them, like if they're delayed 1 to 2 weeks, which we don't have many of those, 4 weeks or more than 4 weeks, this is where we're at. And it's staffing, it's all kinds of factors. So that's that guide. Here is the actual one-pager for our staff, but we also have a parent one-pager that everyone can access. It doesn't, this is only San Diego Unified employees. The other one is for everyone. It has very similar resources on it. But if you notice, our action plan is here. This is an outline of the program. That document I just showed you is here. But we also have step-by-step guide in determining learning recovery. And it's graphic organizer that walks ed specialists or whoever's providing an IEP service related to a goal on how to determine if there is learning loss. This is updated in live time. It is the only thing they need to save in order to access all of the resources. So that makes it a little bit easier for people to navigate. Okay. So now that brings me to my second system. Learning recovery is going to go away. It's almost done. But alternative dispute resolution, we want to stay. We want to change the culture of our IEP meetings and our teams. And even if a family brings in an advocate, we don't want it to be contentious. We don't want the yelling and the accusations and the blame to happen. We want them to be able to collaborate together. There's always going to be a due process case. I don't think I'm ever going to get to 0 on filings, but I do want to bring our filings down. So I look to our strong leaders in society that guide me, because I'm a jumper. I'll go into the deep end, I'll figure out a way to survive. That's just me. But I know it needs to be step by step. I know it can't happen overnight, and so I just remind myself with my quotes. This is our focus of work, and I share this at all of my stakeholder meetings so that families know where we're headed and that we want to work with them and partner with them. So when deciding to create this system, yes, funding was part of it. Not gonna lie, it was there. There was a big grant, and now there's smaller grants to keep it going. But we also looked at due process data and the filings in due process. We spoke with our community advisory committee to get their perspective, which is made up of parents and community members. And then, again, the grants in our SELPA association throughout California is very much on board with this idea of creating positive collaboration and student-centered IEPs, because we've really gotten away from it. So if you notice in our due process data, this blue line is filings per month. This dark one here is settled in resolution with we have program specialists that do that work. And then this is formal mediation. And then the green is if they withdrew their complaint. So if you notice, we're at like 15 to 20 for each month, almost. The next year, 20 to 30 each month. The trend continues throughout all the years, and it's just, that tells you right there the atmosphere when you're sitting in an IEP meeting, when you're there to talk about what a kid needs to learn, and you're really more talking about what obstacles and difference of opinion that adults have. And so we wanted to create a system that connects the existing structures within our district, as well as culture and people, getting our teams to have empathy and understanding of the different cultures in our city. I don't know, some of you were in here when we were chatting, and we have 65 languages, and we're like the #1 city that has refugees here. Farsi to Somali to, there's a Greek one now, there's a lot. And so that's a huge impact, as well as looking at data and planning. We want to transform the dynamics of our teams and our interactions, the narratives, and the history. Because coming from Chicago, I was in shock when I got here. I'm telling you, I can't say it enough. But again, this quote for me is just very powerful, because we do go in and blame and accuse, and I'm the expert because I have degrees, and yes, I am an expert. I have multiple degrees, but the reality is the parent is an expert in a different way, and that's why we need to use both perceptions to help our students. And it doesn't hurt that, his wife is also a Southside Chicago person. So this is where I live. We have a tiered system. Level 1 is a lot of our putting the P in ADR, our preventative work. That means trainings for parents and families, trainings for staff, family outreach. We were just at the Down Syndrome Buddy Walk this weekend. Tirsa and I love Down syndrome kiddos, so we had so much fun. And supporting families in that way. I had a dad go, yeah, my wife already hired an advocate. I said, hang on, take my pamphlet, take my card, if you need anything along with your advocate or in addition to your advocate. If you have questions about the IEP process, we have a training coming up on November 3rd. Please reach out, it's free. Why not? And so a lot of that work is that first level. And we're trying to develop that preventative piece, because it's powerful when we inform our schools and work with our families in the preventative aspect of this work, because then they feel supported, they feel empowered, and they are ready to go and work together. We have lots of plans for family outreach. One of the models that we have is our transition fair, which Tirsa was helping to coordinate and doing an amazing job, where it's an event. It's not just a vendor fair for kiddos that are planning for post-high school, but it's food trucks and bouncy house mazes and door prizes, and we had so much community involvement with our prizes and with the bouncy stuff. So it's really great. Some of the food trucks, I believe, are donating some of their proceeds back to our special ed division. So we've had like a great outpouring in this first event, and we want to do more of those. We want to go to the different neighborhoods and support the different cultures of our families. I live in level 2. I think the majority of my work, when I'm working on cases and I get referrals, is level 2. Level 2 is organic. It changes with each case. One of the trainings I went to, it was a 5-day training online, but it was amazing. It was through the Pepperdine Law School, I believe is how you say it. But they are, because our SELPA Association is backing this work, they created an entire program for special education administrators on how to use negotiating tools. So they are giving us the tools that they use in divorce mediations and corporate mediations and things like that, so we can apply it to our special ed meetings and give those tools to our teams. And so it's expensive, but it's valuable, and they have a couple different options. But some of the work there is collaborative conferences. It can look like anything. We're gonna have a collaborative conference with the family that is, they choiced into a dual immersion program, and they have twins that are autistic. And in kindergarten, it's all in Spanish. And so they're really struggling with that Spanish component, and so their behaviors have increased, and they're not accessing. And so we're looking at, do they go to the school of residence? Are they gonna go to a special program? And so my other instructional coordinator went with this family and did tours of the two options that we're considering. We're gonna come back with the team and outside of the IEP and have a collaborative conference and discuss the pros and cons of each of the program, any lingering questions parents might still have, and then leave it there and then reconvene the IEP to determine the offer fee. So there's a lot of flexibility in the alternative dispute resolution world in terms of case by case and what each people need. It can be as simple as going with someone on a tour and giving them that neutral perspective. Like, not based on what you told me, this program's not right. Or I took a mom to see a Montsevier classroom that they wanted to put her son in, and she had already had a bad experience at that school and had choiced him somewhere else, and now the option was to go back. I was like, well, let's go check it out. Let's talk it through with the principal. We go in there, and I walked into that Montsevier classroom, and I was like, I wanna stay. Can I go and hang out in the sensory corner? Because that looks lovely. And it was just a really well put together classroom. She got to talk to the teacher, get a feel for all those things. She consented, and the kiddo's doing great. He went from not attending to attending every day and now making progress. So it's those little things that level 2 is. We also have our ombuds person, Brett, who is running around somewhere in one of the rooms. And he's been in the district for a while, so our district has had ombuds people for a while. And he is very neutral. He works mainly with parent referrals. He is really great with outside resources. California has quite a few, more than my beginnings experiences. And they have like RAP services that will go in the home and all sorts of things. And he knows all those agencies. He's helping me learn and navigate the military out here, because there is such a huge military presence in our communities. And then level 3, I hope we don't get to level 3, because that's where I have to go in and actually mediate and facilitate an IEP, or do hold a caucus where people can't even be in the same room, whether it's on Zoom or in person, and I go between the 2 rooms and share information back and forth. That is not where I want to live, but if we get there and that helps us stay out of due process and come to consent, I'm happy. We have a lot of non-consented to IEPs in our district. It's not something that I want to continue, and it is not something I'm proud of. But it is the culture that we are in that we need to change. These are just some ideas and workshops that I've already created. I love the first one because this is a big part of the work I did. You know, when you're working in communities with emotionally disturbed kids, which is my expertise, behaviors, you're looking at the difference in culture. And we need to take that approach when we're communicating with families. You know, every culture is so different, and using that as a way to lead how we communicate is really important, and it'll just connect people better. I did a training when I was in Chicago from Ruby Payne, and she's from Dallas, and the culture of poverty. And I grew up on the south side of Chicago. I was the polka dot. All my friends were of the culture of poverty. That's what I grew up in, and it still opened my eyes. You know, there was so much there that I had no idea. I keep the book and I look at it often. I'm learning, there's lots of learnings that I'm going through now, the military community and what that looks like. The Asian community and the various Asian communities. My neighborhood's Vietnamese. I didn't grow up with it. I saw Asian people when I got to college on the north side of Chicago. You know, it's just our life experiences. So now I'm learning more cultures and and more aspects, and then with our refugee families, what they go through. So having that empathy piece and that cultural lens is really important to the ADR work. The other one that I really love is the art of asking questions. When you're sitting in an IEP and that parent is just questioning, you get defensive. Your guard goes up. You arm yourself. And they're asking questions because they don't know. We're perceiving it as they're questioning our expertise, and that's not what it is. And so there's a way to ask questions. There's a way to take in the questions and, you know, deconstruct them so that you can come with an unarmored response. So those are just some ideas. We also we are a restorative justice district, and so we offer hurt circles for our teams. I learned how to do this when I was at the therapeutic or separate school, and it was really valuable because all of our kiddos transitioned back to their home school at some point. We were not a permanent placement, and so my best example is I had a kindergartner. When she was in pre-K at her school, she was biting, kicking, screaming, running down the street naked. You know, like, her trauma was intense, and she traumatized this teen. They were traumatized by a preschool kid. We got her, she got mental health supports, mom got RAP services, you know, she got some boundaries put in place that she needed, and she was ready to transition back. She had met the criteria to transition back to her home school, and upon going back, they were hyper-focusing on her behaviors. And I'm like, so describe it for me, because I'm not there, I'm in my classroom, and I'm like, but that's age appropriate. And so what my former boss and friend and I did is we went in with the team and we did a hurt circle, a restorative justice hurt circle with them, and really tried to work through that trauma so that they can move past it and accept this little girl back into their school as part of their community, or move on from a kiddo that might have been a traumatic experience. All those post-pandemic behaviors we're seeing in our little ones, teachers get traumatized. They have trauma too. It's not just our kiddos that have trauma. And so it's just working through that with them. And if you guys, if you go in the slides, you won't get access, but I will change permissions so that you can see the protocols and the reflection. I'll make sure the reflection is a forced copy. And then on our one pager, we also have referrals. Parents can do referrals and staff can do referrals for support. The cool thing about the parent one is I found an add-on in Google called Modo, and they can record their responses. And then it sends that in that way to you. So any of our visually challenged parents, people that might not have the educational background, I know my mother would, if she had this option when I was in school, she wouldn't fill anything like that out. My dad would have to do it because she wasn't comfortable writing a narrative. Well, she could talk all day. So she would record, that's something she would do. And so I really love that add-on. So we really want to make sure that we're fostering this cooperation of many minds and partnerships to move planning and cultural shifts from directed to interactive mindsets, which embraces a shared responsibility fueled by empathy. And that was something the keynote speaker was talking about yesterday in all of her continuums. And in our special ed division, we've done a lot of that work and reflection on how we lead and how we are representatives of our district in a collaborative model. So the first thing, we work with integrated teams. And so I'm gonna call you out, Kim. We have our program manager, Kim Shapazian, for our non-public schools, and she's on my ADR team. And I have a program manager that supports schools, and I have our BCBA therapist for the district, and we all come together and I just share out, you know, what we're working on, here's our data, I need help with, and they're my thought partners. So it's a space for us to collaborate and take different expertise and perspectives and add value to our work. We also now have case collaboration meetings. They're on Tuesdays. It is a calendar hold. It is not a required meeting, but it is a common space to problem solve and talk about specific cases. It's mainly for our program managers, but if we have an issue, like I had an issue at a school, a case at a school, and I was like, I really would be interested in our psychologist viewpoint. And so I had our lead psychologist come to that meeting with the program manager, and we were able to digest and really go through the assessment, which was impacting this case a lot. And so that space was very valuable to get really specific. And then you're not chasing everybody around. People can call in, they can Zoom in, we can be in person, because Tuesday is our office day. We don't go to any sites on Tuesdays. Let's see. The last one I'm working on, I'm waiting for the district because they have to set it up, is social media. No TikTok. No, we're not doing that. But I will do Instagram, I will do Facebook. I'll even make myself do Twitter. But I think social media is super important because so many of our parents, what are they on? Their phones, just like their kids. They're on their phones. They're looking at their social media, they search things on their phone. They don't get out their computers and check their email there. It's on their phone. And so why not meet them where they are? And our family engagement department is insanely amazing. And so I'm using a lot of our parent outreach models and getting support from our family engagement department. They are a district-wide department on the gen ed side, but they do great workshops. They have events every year. I think Halloween, they usually have an event where they give out costumes. They have trainings on homework help. I did a training for learning recovery with them. They have a whole group of Somali refugee families that they support and give special outreach and trainings to them. So they are wonderful, and their social media is very good. We also have interns in our district. These are not student teachers. These are people that are in school and working full-time in special ed. So these are people, they could be in year 1 or 2 of their college careers and be in the special ed classroom, in Mod Severe classrooms, if that's what they're going for. And so they need a lot of support. So we work with their support people that they're assigned to, like they have one person that goes out and coaches them and supports them and does all that stuff. And we work with them and give them trainings right away to their leads, so it trickles down and they can feel supported. And that's just merely training our brand new people, growing them in the way that we want them to grow for our culture shift. Right now we're in federal monitoring with our dual identified students, so this hasn't taken off yet, but it will soon once that's finished, because that's a lot of work. Our Office of Language Acquisition, really focusing on our English learner families that have dual identified students, going to their community meetings, attending their events, because they do events as well, and collaborating with them, because so many of the strategies they use, we use, and what we use, they use, and so there's a lot of overlap there. We have a new department that I am working on fostering a partnership with, called the New Family Service Assistance Department. And anything that's working with families, that P part, I'm all about it. We have community partnerships. This will grow, but right now we have partnerships with military lawyers that support military families, and that's starting to bud and grow. They give trainings of their own, and so why not? We go to those events, we invite them to our events, and there's that cross collaboration because we have such a huge military presence. We have Say San Diego. They do podcasts, community events, and outreach in what we coin as below the 8 which pretty much means southeast San Diego, where the majority of our high needs areas are concentrated. And so working with that community, people trust them. People go to their events, and we want people to see that we're a partner with them, and they can be very critical of the work we do in the public school system, and rightfully so. The last piece is our data. Again, I do want to say this has only been a year department. Some of this as ideas, and we're just stepping into this work. And I'm hoping next year, if I end up in Wisconsin, that I can share the progress we've made. But data in our special ed division, there is data that informs our decisions, but it's not necessarily shared in the way that with the integrated model that we're working in. And so we're trying to foster that. This is a volunteer group that meets once a month. And we're looking at data from each department, asking those questions, those hard questions, sending them emails and perspective, and trying to understand the data so that it can drive how we train people, how we coach teams, how we train parents. We also are working with I forgot to mention this, the Exceptional Family Resource Center through San Diego State, and they are helping us put on a 3-part parent training for IEP basics, meaningful communication, and advocating for your child. We're also going to create some podcasts because that's lasting resources. And we want to create a parent mentoring program to where our parents that have been through the system, that know how to support their fellow parent, it's a resource, it's someone to lean on. They can relate to the experience. This is an example of some of our compliance data. Our compliance team is working with the CDE pretty closely on just overdue events. We have a lot of overdues. And part of that is staffing. Part of that is non-consented to IEPs. You know, it's a mixed bag, but at least we're beginning to really dive into the data to see what we need and where we need it, and what we need to develop as a system. This is where I want to go. I want to be able to send some of that specific data back to our case managers and make it easy for them, so drop downs, and get really just, well, why wasn't that IEP locked? Why is it overdue? Oh, it was during the school break. Great, thanks. Getting to the why and having a little more quantitative data. And then we can provide the steps. Okay, here's how we rectify some of those things. Some of them are easy, but not all of them. And then I also track our data by school site, area, type of request. So was it a compliance error, communication error? Really, those are the two that I've seen so far. Communication, or there's some type of compliance, or placement is another big one. I know due process shared with me, and it's not reflected in the graphs, but a lot of theirs is coming from not a clear offer of faith. Teams aren't really saying, this is your offer of faith. They're going through it, but they're not calling it out so that parents understand it and know it. And then what happened? So I had 2 cases that still went through process. I have one now that went to process. I'm working on implementing the agreement, and we can't implement the agreement because of the kiddo. And so I'm also working with the family to help them understand and navigate what that kid needs, and they're out of ideas. And so, okay, why don't we try what the district is offering? Here's what that looks like. And so that IEP's Thursday. Fingers crossed. But then with just tracking, did we get consent? Was it completed because consent wasn't an issue? And really looking at our data as well. I want to be able to compare our numbers with due process in the future. Again, this is growing, it is step by step, it is a process that we're working on. Right now I have 3 instructional coordinators and our ombuds person. We hope to grow that to have community parent liaisons, maybe more instructional coordinators down the road. Working in finance in my past life was not a fun experience, but I've learned so much. I know how to approach, I need another position and here's why. It's valuable to you because you're not gonna be paying out those dollars to due process. 20 filings a month, that's millions of dollars. That's not a drop in the bucket, because you're paying attorney fees, it's a lot. And so we wanna really deal with that in a collaborative way. Here's my team, Tirsa over here. We have Joanna Dahl and Brett that are roaming around. I think my director's sitting right out there. And there's one more that's supposed to be announced tonight, so I will have another picture up there for us. So questions, concerns, if you want resources, please just shoot me an email. I'm the only Easter in the system. There's not many Easters across the nation. If you want to take an example of our flyer that we give out to families, I have some set up over there. I have a bookmark for our office hours, feel free.